Hi everyone, I'm Mike and this is the Sunday Art Show. So this week I want to show you how I created this watercolour painting of the cathedral in Exeter. So I've lived in Exeter for around about 30 years and I really love the city. There's a little thumbnail sketch I did in Biro and you can probably just about see I've used watercolour pencil to outline the same sketch onto an A2 sheet of mixed media paper. So I'm beginning by just putting down a very runny wash of watercolour. And I'm just using a few colours today. I'm using Winsor and Newton watercolours. And I'm just using the three primaries, burnt umber, and that's it actually. So I sprayed the surface of the paper with water already, and I've got my board propped up at a near vertical angle. It's not quite vertical, but certainly enough that the water and the paint will run down quite happily. And having done that, having kind of put in that wash, which I've mixed up with the blue and a little touch of the red, I've then kind of lifted off some of that with the paper towel, as you just saw. And that's just to introduce a little bit of variation in the tone of the sky. And you can see on this day it's kind of a wintry sky. We're into November now. There are clouds in the sky, but they're not those sort of beautiful fluffy clouds you get in summer. And I kind of cut around the outline of the cathedral, and now I'm popping in kind of a yellow ochre tone. And if there any texture or brush marks occur, as I paint that in, then that's absolutely fine. Now what I'm doing here is just popping in very loosely. I'm taking a very loose approach to the architecture here. Some of the little architectural features, the little spires that sit along the rooftop. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail. I'm definitely not using a ruler. And what I'm going to do is try and stay nice and loose and expressive, and then just pick out key areas. So having done that, I'm now popping in a slightly darker tone. So I've mixed in some more of the blue into that ochre colour and some more of the red as well. And just beginning to introduce a sense of light and dark, but I'm keeping the washes very thin. And so, although I'm putting in an outline of that roof there, for the most part I'm not really drawing the cathedral. I'm just kind of looking at it as a whole and then picking out bits which catch my eye in order to kind of capture the essence of the building. And of course this is one of the great joys and challenges of watercolour, is that it's a little bit unpredictable. You can see I'm kind of spraying the paper with water there. And so, sometimes you get lucky, you get a beautiful little run of colour or a little bit of texture, and it's exactly what you want, perhaps even more so, or even better than you hoped. And other times, the paint won't go quite where you want. But, that's the fun and that's the challenge. So, leading up to the cathedral, as you would have seen just briefly earlier, and I will show you again later in the video, is a paved pathway. It's quite wide. And on this particular day, it had been raining, and so it's still a little bit damp on the ground. And so the sky was reflecting in the paving stones and the pathway that's just going off to the left that I just painted. And so I'm popping in a purple, as you can see, put a thin wash of a fairly pale purple on first. And then you can see, this is what I was talking about with the runs. I'm just allowing that darker shade of purple to kind of run down and see what happens, because I want a central band of light in the centre of the path where the light is really catching that wet paving. And having done that, in the foreground I'm being a little more careful with my brush strokes. I'm keeping the direction diagonal, so that they're acting almost as quite subtle perspective lines to kind of lead the eye into the painting. I'm giving a similar treatment to the areas of lawn, either side of the path. So just mixed up a green in the usual way with the blue and the yellow, and then I've added a little bit of red so it's not too bright and too cheery, because this is a winter's day. And you can see I'm using a round brush, and yeah, that's quite good for watercolour, because you can just do a little flick with the tip and get a nice fine line. Or alternatively, you can roll the brush. You can scrunch the brush up and get nice frayed marks as well. But having used the round brush up until this point, I've now switched to a flat. And the big advantage with the flat is you can use its edge on, as I am here, to get quite fine lines. You can use just the corner to get little points, And of course you can do broader brush strokes as well. So I like keeping the brush fairly big because that generally makes you think about the mark you're going to make more. If you use a small brush, especially in the early stages, I mean, small brushes are fine, you know, I definitely use them towards the end for a few little details here and there. I have a tendency at least to get a little fiddly and tend to try and draw with the brush. That's not quite what I want to do here. You can see I'm popping in the lines. I'm not worrying too much if they're perfectly vertical. I'm just trying to work fairly quickly, be confident, put the marks down, and then all of those lines will have small errors in them. You know, some will be tipping to the left, some will be tipping to the right, but on average that should all kind of even out, hopefully, and the overall effect should still be coherent, and the building as a whole should read as a believable piece of architecture. That's my hope. So on the right now, you can see I'm changing the angle and the way I use the brush to get a variety of marks with a darker green to establish the bank of foliage and trees on the right. Now, that's not really there to the extent that it is in my painting, but what I'm doing is deliberately creating this dark region, which isn't going to be all that well defined on the right. And a little bit later on the left, I'm going to put in the tree that is there. And again, that'll be quite dark relative to the cathedral at least. And I hope that will create those two things, either side of the painting in the foreground, will create a nice sense, a nice aperture for us to view the cathedral through. So we're almost framing the cathedral, the main subject of the painting, between these two regions of trees and between these two regions of darker tone as well. So with watercolour, the traditional way of working, which is more or less what I'm doing today, is I'm starting with the lightest of tones to begin with, and then gradually going darker and darker. And of course, how light those tones that you put down first of all appear depends very much on how dark you make your darks. So that's what I'm keeping in mind the entire time. So as you saw, I've planned the painting out somewhat, but at the same time I do like to kind of freestyle it and be spontaneous and see where the watercolour takes me and just where the painting takes me as well, you know, just to see what happens. So I've put down 2 layers of green on the right there of different shades, and now I'm coming in with a purple, you know, in keeping with some of the colours in the paving and even in the sky. Really, it's the same kind of region of the spectrum, and just putting in some darker shadows again. Working on this tree on the left. Now, you may have remember from earlier, or you'll see later on in the video, the leaves of this tree were, you know, really beautiful orange, but I decided here to make them a little bit more purpley, just to keep the colour scheme as a whole, you know, reasonably harmonious. So the church is the cathedral is quite yellowy, golden yellow, and the complementary colour to yellow is purple. So I kind of felt if I don't want to make it too orange on the left, it might be a little bit too jarring. So continuing with the round brush, now I am doing just a little bit of drawing and putting in a little bit of outline work, but being careful to stay fairly loose. So the complexities of the surface of the cathedral, if you were going to capture every little nook and cranny and every little statue and gargoyle and curled piece of stone and castellation that goes along the top and all the spires, you know, almost a lifetime's work to paint the thing, let alone actually build one. So what I'm doing here is trying to keep the approach going that I used right at the start. But again, I'm just picking out little lines in a little bit of a darker colour. I'm using a blue here. Just picking out little details to describe what's going on, but not being too heavy-handed about it. I'm trying to keep my mark making quite light and lively, trying to avoid too many perfectly continuous lines, trying to keep the lines broken here and there, not getting too fussy when I describe the windows that I just put into the tower on the left. Just simple vertical lines, boom, boom, boom. And, you know, I can always add to those later. I can always refine them later if I want to, if I keep this looseness and light approach going. So you can see the cathedral is starting to be framed, as I mentioned earlier, by the bank of foliage on the right and the rather tall and quite elegant tree on the left. You can see that's the orange tree there. I've made it purple and somewhat taller. So this is pretty much the view just about here that I'm actually painting, and I've moved the tree in on the left, I've moved it into the right, and you can see the dark greens on the right as well, and I've moved those into the left and made them rather more ominous and darker. So when you're painting architecture of this type, obviously this building is particularly large, so it's quite important, I feel, to include, you know, something which the viewer can relate the scale to. So for that reason, and also I feel it makes it more relatable as well, if you put a couple of people in to explain or to show that people are walking through this environment. So again, I'm keeping the people very simple. They're essentially silhouettes with a few hints of darker and lighter tone. A couple of people in the foreground. Just using a flat brush. It's about a 1/2 inch wide. Again, avoiding the small brush so as not to get too fussy, even for this smaller person that I'm putting sort of halfway between the foreground and the cathedral door. So by having those 3 people, 2 in the foreground, then this one off in the middle distance, much smaller, it will really help to give the cathedral a true sense of scale for the viewer. So suddenly we'll realise, oh, this is a huge building, because, you know, we're all evolved and trained and habitually used to looking at people and scaling things to the human being, because that's what we're so familiar with. So you can see now the cathedral looks much more like it's off into the distance, and it looks much more like it's a very big building. Again, with the flat brush and a little bit of acrylic, actually, I'm just putting in a few highlights on the wet path in the foreground, just to hint at the fact that that pathway is paved. And I can use that same colour. It's not far off, just pure white actually, maybe with a little bit of purple in there. I can use that same colour just to put a few highlights on the people, and then a bit of ultramarine blue, just to strengthen some of the darks as well. But the painting is coming together quite nicely, I feel, and I've taped it around the edges with masking tape, you know, which is what we usually do for watercolours, just to keep everything in place. The mixed media paper does buckle a little bit when it gets very wet, but once the paint is dried, you know, you can smooth that out just by gently rolling the paper. And it really is quite resilient, and is, I feel, a really good surface to work on for watercolour. It's great stuff. I'm just popping in with the edge, with the tips of my flat brush here, a few lines to indicate that there are steps, sort of long, wide, quite low steps, just going down the gradual gradient towards the cathedral. But again, I'm not worrying about precision architectural drawing here. I just want to kind of hint at things and keep the impressionist style going. Now you can see the cathedral. That was a slightly different view. Lots going on in the window, in the huge windows, and windows within windows, and all sorts of things going on. It really is an incredible building. So what I'm doing here, I just want to highlight a little section of the cathedral, keep most of it as light and airy as I've kept it throughout the painting, but I'm just using a watercolour marker here with the fine liner nib to just again select a few little details and just add lines over the top of the painted work I've done already. So again, I've chosen blue not because that's the colour that's in the painting or in the cathedral, but I just feel it will sing quite nicely against the pale golden yellow of the stone. And I've got blue people bottom right, I've got kind of a bluey purpley tree on the left, and then with that blue window and the door I'm just putting in, I've got a nice little triangle of blue going from right foreground off to the cathedral, the focus of the painting, to the left foreground. So and there's the finished painting. So those 3 things, the figure in the middle distance and the perspective of the pathway approaching the cathedral, gives a nice sense of depth and space to the finished painting. So there we go. Hope you enjoyed this painting of Exeter Cathedral. I'm happy with the way it turned out and the sense of light and liveliness in this one. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, and please remember to like and comment below the video. Ask me any questions you like about the art, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you next Sunday for the next episode of the Sunday Art Show.